The phone screen lit up at 2 a.m. with a single line from Elena's mother, "I need to see you tomorrow, it's important." And my hands went cold before I even opened the message, because in 11 years of knowing that woman, she had never once texted me without adding a heart emoji or asking about my mother's health first. And something about the bareness of those 7 words told me that whatever was coming was going to change everything I thought I understood about my life. If you believe in kindness, in second chances, in the quiet ways love finds us when we're not looking, hit that like button right now. Drop a comment telling me you're here. Share this with someone who needs a little hope today, and subscribe to Kindness Corner, because this story is about to take you somewhere you won't forget. My name is Daniel, and for as long as I can remember, Elena had been the fixed point around which my entire life orbited. Though for most of those years I would have told you with complete conviction that she was simply my best friend. We met when we were 7 years old, in a schoolyard where she was crying because someone had stepped on the sandcastle she'd spent all recess building. And I did the only thing my 7-year-old brain could think to do, which was sit down next to her in the dirt and start rebuilding it with her, brick by brick, until the bell rang and neither of us cared that our knees were filthy and our hands smelled like wet sand. "Hi there." Her mother, Clara, picked us both up that day because my own mother was running late from work, and I still remember riding in the back seat of that old blue station wagon, Elena's hand finding mine without either of us thinking twice about it, the way children do when they've decided, in some wordless corner of their hearts, that this is a person worth keeping. Clara became, over the following decade, something like a second mother to me. She was the kind of woman who kept a drawer in her kitchen specifically stocked with the snacks she knew I liked, who remembered the anniversary of my father's passing every single year without being told twice, who showed up to my high school graduation with a bouquet of flowers even though my own parents were seated 3 rows back, simply because she wanted to make sure someone was there the moment I walked off that stage smiling. She used to say that raising Elena had accidentally given her 2 children instead of 1, and she said it with such warmth, such unguarded affection, that I never once questioned whether I belonged in that house, at that table, in the middle of that family that wasn't technically mine but felt more like home than my own sometimes did. Elena and I built our entire adolescence around each other in the way that only 2 people who trust each other completely can. We rode bikes to the edge of town just to see how far we could go before our legs gave out. We stayed up on the phone until 3 in the morning during the summer before high school, talking about nothing and everything, the kind of conversations that don't have a destination but somehow feel like they matter more than any conversation with a purpose ever could. When her parents' marriage began cracking apart during our sophomore year, she showed up at my window at midnight, tears streaming, asking if she could just sit somewhere quiet for a while, and I didn't ask a single question. I simply opened the window wider and let her climb through, the way you do for someone who has already given you 1,000 reasons to trust them without asking why. When my father died the summer before junior year, it was Elena who sat with me on the curb outside the funeral home for 2 hours because I couldn't make myself walk back inside, and she didn't try to fill the silence with words that wouldn't have helped anyway. She just stayed, her shoulder against mine, until I was ready. By the time we reached our 20s, people had started asking the question so often that it had become something of a running joke between us. "Are you 2 together yet? When are you finally going to admit it?" My cousin used to tease me mercilessly at family gatherings, insisting that no man spends that much energy remembering a woman's coffee order and her allergy to shellfish and the exact way she likes her scrambled eggs unless something more than friendship is cute at work underneath. I always laughed it off, told them they were imagining things, that Elena and I were simply close, the way people can be close without it meaning anything more complicated than loyalty. And for years, I actually believed that. I had convinced myself so thoroughly that our relationship existed in some safe, unthreatening category that I never let myself examine what it actually felt like to watch her fall in love with someone else, to sit through her wedding shower for a man named Marcus that never quite worked out, to feel something twist deep in my chest every single time she mentioned a date with someone new, and simply label that feeling as protectiveness, as the natural concern of a friend who only wanted the best for her. It took Clara, in the end, to say the thing that neither Elena nor I had ever been brave enough to say to ourselves. It happened on an unremarkable Tuesday evening in October, the kind of evening where the sky turns that particular shade of orange that makes even the most ordinary street look like something out of a painting. I had come over for what was supposed to be a regular dinner, the kind Clara had been hosting for nearly 2 decades, where Elena and I would sit at the same worn wooden table we'd been sitting at since childhood, elbows nearly touching, finishing each other's sentences the way people do when they've spent so much time together that their thoughts have started to move in tandem. Elena had stepped out to take a call from work, leaving me alone in the kitchen with Clara, who was stirring a pot of soup with the kind of slow, deliberate motion that told me she had something on her mind long before she said a word. She set the spoon down, wiped her hands on her apron, and turned to face me directly, the way she used to when I was a teenager and had done something she needed to address without letting me squirm out of the conversation. She told me that she was tired. Not tired in body, she clarified, but tired in the particular way a mother gets tired when she has spent years watching two people she loves circle around something obvious without ever landing on it. She told me she had watched me walk through that door for 11 years, and that in all that time she had never once seen me look at anyone the way I looked at her daughter, not even when I thought no one was paying attention. She told me she had watched Elena talk about other men with a kind of polite, distant interest, but that the moment my name came up in conversation, something in her daughter's whole face changed, softened, lit up in a way that no other name managed to produce. And then, without any dramatic build-up, without lowering her voice or glancing toward the hallway to make sure Elena wasn't listening, she asked me the question that would rearrange the entire architecture of my life: when were we getting married? I remember laughing at first, the nervous kind of laugh that comes out when your body doesn't know how else to respond to something too large to process immediately. I told her that Elena and I weren't together, that we were just friends, that she must be misreading something. But Clara didn't laugh back. She simply looked at me with the patient, unwavering expression of a woman who has raised a daughter long enough to know the difference between a friendship and something two people are too frightened to name, and she said something that I have turned over in my mind every single day since. She said that fear disguises itself as friendship all the time, that people call things safe and comfortable because those words feel less terrifying than admitting how much it would hurt to lose what they already have. She told me that she wasn't asking because she wanted to embarrass me, but because she was old enough now to understand that life doesn't wait patiently for people to work up their courage, and she didn't want to watch two people she loved lose each other to hesitation, when everyone around them could see so plainly what they refused to see in themselves. I didn't have an answer for her that night. I left dinner early, made some excuse about an early morning, and drove home with my hands shaking on the steering wheel, replaying her words over and over until they stopped sounding like an accusation and started sounding like a truth I had been outrunning for years. The weeks that followed were some of the most disorienting of my life. I found myself unable to look at Elena the same way. Every small gesture that I had once dismissed as ordinary friendship now seemed to carry a weight I hadn't allowed myself to notice. The way she always saved me the last piece of whatever dessert we were sharing, the way she texted me good morning before she texted anyone else, the way her voice softened slightly whenever she said my name, as though it were a word she liked the shape of in her mouth. I began cataloging memories I had spent years filing under the safe heading of friendship, and one by one they started rearranging themselves into something that looked unmistakably like love. The night she showed up at my apartment after my father's funeral and simply held my hand until I fell asleep on the couch. The way she had once told a man she was dating that she couldn't see him anymore because he had made a comment about how much time she spent with me, and she said with total conviction that she wasn't willing to shrink our friendship to make someone else comfortable. The trip we took to the coast 2 summers earlier, when we stayed up until sunrise talking on the beach, and I had felt for one unguarded moment an almost unbearable urge to reach over and brush the hair out of her face, an urge I had smothered so quickly that I had almost convinced myself it never happened. I want to pause here and ask you something because I think this story only matters if it means something to you too. If you've ever loved someone quietly, if you've ever mistaken fear for friendship, if you believe that people deserve a second chance to say the things they were too afraid to say the first time, Type second chances in the comments right now, so I know you're still with me. Because what happens next is the part of this story I've never told anyone in full. For nearly a month, I avoided being alone with Elena. I told myself it was because I needed time to sort through my own feelings before I did anything that might damage a friendship that had survived 20 years. But the truth, which I only admitted to myself much later, was that I was terrified. Terrified of being wrong, terrified that Clara had seen something in me that Elena had never felt in return, and that if I said anything I would lose not just the possibility of something more but the entire foundation of friendship we had built our lives on top of. So I did what frightened people often do. I hid, using distance as a kind of armor, answering her texts a little slower than usual, finding reasons to reschedule our usual weekend plans, telling myself that the ache in my chest every time I saw her name light up my phone was something I could simply wait out if I gave it enough time. Elena noticed, of course, because she always noticed everything about me, the way you notice things about a person whose rhythms have become as familiar as your own heartbeat. She showed up at my apartment on a Thursday evening without calling first, something she almost never did, and when I opened the door I could see immediately that she wasn't going to let me hide behind vague excuses any longer. She stood in my doorway in the rain, her hair damp and clinging to her forehead, and asked me, in a voice that was trying very hard to sound casual and failing completely, what she had done wrong. She told me that she had spent the last month replaying every conversation we'd had, searching for the moment she had said something that pushed me away, and that the not knowing was worse than anything I could have possibly said to her directly. Watching her stand there, vulnerable in a way I had rarely seen her be, I understood that I owed her the truth, even if the truth cost me everything. So I told her about the dinner with her mother, about the question that had cracked something open in me that I hadn't realized was sealed shut. Hashawad. I told her about the memories I had spent weeks re-examining, about the fear that had kept me quiet for years, dressed up in the comfortable language of friendship. I told her that I loved her, not in the easy way friends say it to each other at the end of a phone call, but in the way that means you have built your entire understanding of home around a single person, and that I was terrified of what admitting that might cost us both. I told her I would rather have her in my life as a friend forever than risk losing her entirely by reaching for something more, and that I understood if she needed time or space or wanted to pretend I had never said any of it at all. She didn't say anything for a long moment, standing there in the rain with her arms wrapped around herself, and in that silence I felt the particular kind of dread that comes from having finally told the truth and having no idea whether it was going to save you or destroy you. And then she started crying. Not the kind of crying that comes from sadness, but the kind that comes from years of held breath finally being released. And she told me that she had loved me since we were 17 years old, since the night I sat with her outside her parents' house while they screamed at each other inside, since the moment I had looked at her, soaked and shivering, and told her she never had to explain herself to me. She told me she had spent years convincing herself that what she felt for me was simply the deep loyalty of friendship, because the alternative, the possibility that I didn't feel the same way, that admitting the truth might cost her the one person who had never once let her down, was too frightening to risk. She told me that her mother had said something to her 2 weeks earlier, something almost identical to what she had said to me, and that she had spent every day since wondering if I would ever find the courage to say what she had been too afraid to say herself. We stood in that doorway for a long time after that, neither of us quite believing that the thing we had both been protecting ourselves from for over a decade had turned out to be the same fear, hiding in both of us, keeping us apart under the disguise of safety. I remember reaching out and wiping the rain from her cheek, my hand trembling. And she leaned into it the way you lean into something you've wanted for so long that your body remembers the shape of it before your mind fully catches up. When I finally kissed her, it didn't feel like the beginning of something new. It felt like arriving somewhere I had been walking toward my entire life without realizing the destination had a name. The months that followed were not without their own difficulties, because falling in love with your best friend does not erase the fact that you are still, fundamentally, two whole and complicated people learning how to fit your lives together in a different shape than the one you'd grown used to. There were nights of miscommunication. Moments where old habits of friendship collided awkwardly with the new vulnerability of romantic love, arguments that neither of us knew quite how to navigate because we had never had to fight as anything other than friends before. There was a particularly difficult stretch in the spring when Elena's job required her to travel for 6 weeks straight, and the distance, combined with the newness of what we were building, made both of us anxious in ways we hadn't expected, each of us privately terrified that the other might realize the friendship had been safer, easier, less breakable. I remember a phone call during that stretch where Elena, exhausted and far from home, admitted through tears that she was scared we had ruined something irreplaceable by trying to make it into something more, and I sat on the edge of my bed at midnight, my own chest tight with the same fear, and told her the only thing I knew for certain, that whatever we were building was still ours, still worth protecting. And that fear was simply the price of choosing something that actually mattered, instead of settling for something safe. We got through it, the way people who are genuinely committed to each other get through the hard, unglamorous parts of love that no one puts in the highlight reel. We learned how to argue without abandoning each other. We learned how to be honest about our fears instead of letting them curdle into distance. We learned that the friendship we had spent 20 years building was not something romantic love threatened to destroy, but the very foundation that made the romantic love durable in the first place, because we already knew how to show up for each other on the worst days, long before we ever knew how to hold each other on the best ones. If this story is touching something in you right now, if it's reminding you of someone you love but have never told, I want you to know that it's not too late, and I want you to show this story some love by liking it, commenting your own truth, sharing it with someone who needs to hear it, because somewhere out there, someone is waiting for the courage that this story might give them. A year after that rainy doorway conversation, on a Tuesday evening that felt deliberately unremarkable in the same way that Tuesday with Clara had felt unremarkable, I found myself back in that same kitchen, at that same worn wooden table, except this time Clara was not stirring soup with a knowing look on her face. She was sitting across from me, tears already gathering in her eyes, because she knew, before either Elena or I had said a single word, exactly why I had asked her to step outside with me for a moment while Elena finished setting the table. I had asked Clara's blessing that evening, not out of some old-fashioned obligation, but because she was the one person in the world who had seen what neither Elena nor I could see in ourselves, and it felt only right that she should be the first to know that her question, asked so plainly over a pot of soup a year earlier, was about to be answered. She held my hands in both of hers, the same hands that had packed my lunches and dried my tears and remembered my father's death anniversary every year without fail. And she told me that she had been waiting for this moment since the day she watched a 7-year-old boy sit down in the dirt to help rebuild a sandcastle instead of walking away. She told me that some people spend their whole lives searching for the kind of love that feels like home, and that she had watched it grow, slow and quiet and unnoticed, right in front of her for 2 decades, and that nothing in her life had made her prouder than watching the two of us finally find the courage to claim it. I proposed to Elena that same night, in the kitchen where we had eaten 1,000 dinners together as children, where her mother had asked the question that changed everything, where the two of us had built an entire childhood out of small, ordinary moments that turned out to be the architecture of something extraordinary. I didn't have an elaborate speech prepared, no grand gesture, no crowd of onlookers, just the two of us, standing in the kitchen that had witnessed the entire arc of our friendship, and I asked her the only question that mattered, the same one her mother had asked me a year earlier, except this time I was the one asking it, and this time I already knew the answer before she said it, because I could see it in her face the same way Clara had always been able to see it in mine. She said yes before I had even finished the sentence, laughing through tears, and Clara, who had been pretending not to watch from the hallway, came rushing in and wrapped both of us in her arms, saying over and over that she had always known since the day she picked up 2 dirty, sandy children from that schoolyard and drove them home in the back seat of her old blue station wagon. We were married the following spring, in a small backyard ceremony under a canopy of string lights, surrounded by the people who had watched us grow up side by side without ever quite understanding what they were watching until it finally became undeniable. Clara stood in the front row, and when the officiant asked if anyone wished to say a few words before the vows, she stood up, her voice steady despite the tears streaming freely down her face, and told the story of a rainy afternoon soup pot and a question she had been too impatient to keep to herself any longer. A question that had taken 11 years to form and less than 5 seconds to answer. Everything two frightened, loving people had spent their whole lives too afraid to say. She told the guests that kindness is not always loud or dramatic. Sometimes it is simply refusing to let the people you love waste their lives circling around a truth they're too scared to claim, and that she considered it the greatest gift she had ever given either of us, the courage to ask the question neither of us could ask ourselves. I think about that dinner often. The ordinary Tuesday that became the hinge on which my entire life turned. I think about how close I came to spending my whole life mistaking love for friendship, protecting myself so thoroughly from the possibility of rejection that I nearly missed the one person who had been standing beside me since I was 7 years old, holding my hand in the back seat of a station wagon before either of us understood what that hand-holding meant. I think about how frightening it is to tell the truth to the people we love and how much more frightening it would have been to never tell it at all. And I think, most of all, about Clara. About the particular bravery of a mother who loved two young people enough to risk an uncomfortable question over a pot of soup, because she understood something that took me years longer to understand myself. That the people who truly love us will sometimes have to ask us the hard questions, not because they want to embarrass us, but because they cannot bear to watch us lose something precious to nothing more than fear. You can also upload a video or audio file. Elena and I have been married for 3 years now, and there are still nights when we sit at that same worn wooden table, the same one where her mother asked the question that changed everything, and we laugh about how obvious we must have looked to everyone around us while we spent over a decade convincing ourselves we were only friends. We have a daughter now, not yet 2 years old, and Clara insists on calling her our Sandcastle baby, a nod to the schoolyard where 2 7-year-olds first decided, without any words at all, that they were worth staying for. I watch my daughter sometimes, asleep in her crib, and I think about how much of my own happiness exists only because someone loved me enough to ask an uncomfortable question at exactly the right moment, and I wonder how many other people out there are sitting across from someone they love, mistaking fear for friendship, waiting for a version of Clara to walk into their lives and finally say out loud what everyone around them can already see. If you've made it this far with me, I want to ask you something before we finish. Before you close this video, I want you to leave a comment with the word Sandcastle, just that one word, so that I know you stayed until the end, so that I know this story reached you the way I hoped it would, so that somewhere in the comments of this video, there is a small collection of people who believe, the way Clara believed, that love is worth the risk of asking the question out loud. There is a version of this story that exists in almost everyone's life, whether it's a best friend, a person you've loved quietly for years, or a chance you've been too afraid to take because the safety of what you already have feels less risky than reaching for what you actually want. I don't know what circumstances brought you to this video today, but I hope wherever you are in your own story that you find the courage that Clara gave to me, the courage to ask and to answer before the question you've been avoiding becomes a chance you never got to take. If this story moved you even a little, if it reminded you of your own Sandcastle moment, please take a second to like this video, leave a comment, share it with someone who needs a little hope tonight, and subscribe to Kindness Corner, because we will keep telling stories like this one, stories about the quiet, ordinary bravery of love, for as long as you keep showing up to hear them. Thank you for spending this time with me, and I will see you in the next story.